This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook Volume 2, and today is July 31st, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
Hi, Brian. I'm Steve Goldman, and my primary years were from 1986 until 1990.
Okay.
I came back to do graduate school work, so I was sort of tangentially involved with the radio station in the mid 90s. But the bulk of my radio career was from 86 to 90.
Interesting. I don't think I knew about that, about coming back. I guess that would have been the beginning of the Bruce Avery era.
Yes, yes, Bruce, and also my dear friend Michelle Lisi, who
Mm-hmm.
we were colleagues in the late '80s. They had both kind of asked me once I had been back on Long Island, and definitely was going to Hofstra. My graduate work was from February of '94 until the summer of '95. So they had asked me to kind of sit in on meetings and listen to things when what the sports department was doing. That was back in the John Lane, John DeCepolo era of the sports department. So Bruce and Michelle had kind of reached out to me and asked me if I could kind of just be kind of on the sidelines and kind of offer a few pieces of advice every now and then. It wasn't an intrusive role. At least I don't think it was intrusive, but definitely it was interesting seeing what the radio station was becoming, and this was 30 coming on 30 years now. What
Mm-hmm.
the radio station was becoming.
So you didn't get back on the mic at all? You were just sort of listening to tapes and stuff?
I think I did a few things, some interviews now and again, but there wasn't anything that was a regular sort of shift. It was because I mean I wasn't, I knew it wasn't that long since I had graduated, so I kind of knew that it was the students' radio station, and I kind of knew that it wasn't my place to sort of take over anything. It was just like I said, more of an advisory role. But I did a few, when people asked me to go on the air or people asked me to do things in the studio, I was certainly more than welcome to help out.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that time period when it was John Lane and DeCepolo and Adam Chandler and Lon Samuelson, I think
Yes.
the sports department was in the process of kind of rebuilding itself. I think for a couple of years it had sort of gotten a little thin in the ranks and there wasn't as much happening. And Bruce and John and the various Johns made a concerted effort to rebuild that. So I didn't know you were part of that. That's very cool.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, and thank you for mentioning Lon. Lon's going to kill me that I didn't mention his name because Lon and I still see each other at the basketball games. I think we saw each other probably 4 or 5 times, um, along with John Winderman. Um, but yeah, I mean, I, I don't want to I don't want to make it out to be more than what it was, but like I said, it was most of the time it was just basically sitting in on the staff meetings and just kind of listening and occasionally throwing my own opinions in, including about what their on air work was. But you're right, definitely John the Johns was sort of a new era, especially given the facilities that were being built and created also. So it was a very interesting time to, even though it was only about 4 or 5 years after I had graduated the first time, was a very interesting time to see. Like I said, especially when Bruce, with Bruce in his infancy as being the general manager, was definitely an interesting experience to see where the radio station was going.
Yeah. You would have been what I still call the new building, which is now part of the Herbert School of Communication. So you would have been there when they'd moved out of Memorial Hall and into the new facilities.
Yes, and that in and of itself was an eye-opening experience because anybody you've talked to, basically prior to 1990, talking affectionately about the quote, let's just call it the quote unquote facilities in
Mhm.
The basement in Memorial Hall underneath the legendary Bits and Bytes. Um, it definitely had and pardon the pun, it was definitely an underground feel back then. But yes, to see moving the facilities of above ground, and under Bruce's leadership, just basically seeing what the radio station could become, and as we've seen 30 years out, what it has become. Even then, it was a remarkable transformation, to see what they were doing, even like I said, 4 or 5 years removed from my own graduation.
Yeah, and I think that's really great that Michelle and Bruce reached out to you, because you were at the station as an undergrad when it was Jeff Krause running things and Sue Zizza, and now
Right.
there are different people in charge. And I remember that in dealing with Bruce in his early days, that he said, I definitely want to reach out to the past, and I want to continue to bring the legacy of Hofstra Radio with us forward. And that's, again, not to oversell it, but that's a small gesture, but an important gesture to say, hey, you were here before, come with us into the future. And I think that's pretty great.
No, and that's 100% accurate, because every time that I would be at the radio station and I would see Bruce, um, probably one of the last things that Bruce would say to me before we would part ways is he would say something like, "Don't be a stranger," or "You're always welcome," or "Come on by. We'd love to have you." Absolutely true that Bruce wanted any of the alumni from the radio station to give back and to help out the next generation of people at Hofstra.
Hmm. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. That was unexpected, but it brings back memory of our first conversation when you were an undergraduate,
Yeah.
and I believe you were assistant sports director and sports director. And I think I remember maybe it was after your freshman year or something like that. Forgive me if I don't have the details right, but
Right.
other people in the sports department encouraged you to at least run for sports director so you could have time with Jeff Krause and get an interview in and sort of try to earn his respect. And, we're talking about different eras and different individuals running the station. But I wonder if you don't mind talking about that a little bit more, and then what got you ultimately the job as sports director.
Not at all. You have a very good memory, and I appreciate that, because sometimes it helps me refresh my own memory. But yes, so when I started at the radio station, the people in charge were Glenn Koch and Stu Rushfield. Stu Rushfield, now one of the legendary producers at NPR. Um, so yes, it was at the end of my freshman year, and Jeff was conducting the interviews for the executive board positions, and I know it was Stu. I can't remember if it was Glenn and Stu. Also, I should also mention a few other names, because we're in the name dropping business. So HRAAY, who is the sports director at the legendary WINS, and of course a great play-by-play for all sports. Now he's doing the New York Boulders, and Pete Caldera, a great sports writer at the Bergen Record. So they were all there as kind of my mentors at the radio station in the sports department. And as I said, I believe definitely it was Stu, and I can't remember if it was Glenn Koch also. They both kind of nudged me and said, "Hey, you should put in for interviewing for sports director." And I said, "I've only been here a year. I'm just a freshman." They're like, "No, no, no, go ahead, do it. It'll be a good experience." And like you said, it was kind of a way for me to get my foot in the door with Jeff, because we all talk fondly about Jeff Krause, uh,
Hmm.
but Jeff was a very intimidating, sort of bigger than life figure at the radio station, and he saw through the BS. So if you were going to have a conversation with him, it had to be about something substantive. Um, he didn't really like the goofing around as much. I think secretly he found some of it kind of amusing,
Hmm.
um, but he took his position as general manager very seriously, and he expected especially the people on the executive board, to take it seriously as well. Um, So he kind of, even though his persona was all business, he kind of took the attitude of, you could goof around over certain things, but when it came time to doing your work, he expected you to be serious. So it was a very intimidating figure. You could be in this, the offices in Memorial Hall was a very giant one room, sort of like, I guess,
Like a
office.
bullpen, yeah.
Yes, with various desks all over the place. And Jeff's desk was in the back corner, and the sports department desk was in the back room on the other corner.
Hmm.
Um, so even though we were all in the same room, it was very, I'll just say, frightening to even walk past his desk, even to just say hello to him, especially when it looked like he was busy doing something. You really didn't want to interrupt him. Behind him, he always had a stereo with the radio station on. So when he was in the office, even though there was a speaker in the office too that was piping in the station. So Jeff was always listening. Um, so to go back to what you said, so Stu and Glenn, talked me into eventually convincing me to apply for the sports director position, even though I knew there wasn't any chance I was going to get it. But at least they knew that this is my opportunity to kind of have a one-on-one with Jeff, to kind of let Jeff know about my seriousness at the radio station, what my level of commitment was, what my passion was, and also what my leadership potential could be back then. To be honest, I think I completely screwed up the interview because, it was hard for me being a freshman at the station to really kind of assert any sort of leadership qualities. And Jeff did the best he could to try to elicit any sort of feelings about that out of me. And I was so obstinate at every turn to basically say, well, Jeff, I would never do that, or that's something that I would never do, or, thinking back on it, even a year or two later, thinking about it, I'm thinking, what an idiot I was, not seeing what Jeff was trying to do. And what Jeff was basically trying to teach me in that interview, saying, look, if you're going to run this department, these are things that you have to think about. These are decisions you're going to have to make. So if this is something you really want, you need to think about this. And like I said, even a year or two afterwards, thinking about it, not realizing, and now coming on 30, almost 35 years later, hard to believe that that's how long it's been since I've been a senior at the station. Um, you know, realizing that Jeff was doing everything he could to kind of, mold me into trying to assume some sort of leadership position at the station.
Hmm. I'm smiling and nodding the whole time because you mentioned that Jeff was the intimidating figure, and you didn't want to interrupt him or make him angry. And yet, at the same time, he would take the time to talk to a freshman or talk to someone who's new at the station, and not explicitly, but guide them in a certain way and set a series of expectations. And how generous and thoughtful that was. He didn't necessarily have to spend however long it was in the interview with you. He could have asked two questions and said, okay, thank you very much, go away. He took the time, and it was such a mark of his leadership style that he would do that, and that he saw something in you and saw value in it. So thank you for sharing that.
No, absolutely, and I agree with that 100%. Because Jeff was a very interesting dynamic. He loved
Mm.
radio, but he hated the business. He
Mm.
loved the history. One of the courses for radio TV majors um, was, I believe it was called Com 13 back then.
Mm.
I think it was called Survey of Radio or History of Radio, something like that. And it was very dry, and I don't want to say boring, but there wasn't a lot of glitz to the class. But when you listen to Jeff lecture about radio, especially about the history of radio, obviously you knew his passion for the medium itself. Um, I think his stoic nature came about because of the business of radio, that kind of really had an effect on him. But you're absolutely right. He loved the medium, and he never stopped trying to make us better, to mentor us, to give us advice, but also, like you said, to set a tone to say, look, this is not some club for a bunch of goofballs that, we
Right.
do serious work. We're broadcasting. People are listening to us that don't go to the school, and expect a level of expectation. And certainly no more true than, back then, the morning show, because of President Stewart's insistence,
Hmm.
there was a block of classical music. And he made it his business, that anyone who was doing those shifts had a copy of the pronunciation guide of any of the composers and artists and things like that. And if you screwed up a pronunciation, you were definitely going to hear it from him almost immediately. And a gentle, subtle reminder from him saying, you have your pronunciation guide, you should be using it. This is a real radio station that people were actually listening to it. People that didn't live on campus were listening to the station. So there was definitely an expectation of, let's say, professionalism.
Hmm. I thank you for reminding me of Jeff's response to mispronunciations on the air. And if you were in the studio and the light flasher would go off, this is a Memorial Hall, and you pick it up and that voice would be there. And I won't try to copy it, but
No,
that's pronounced Shostakovich or whatever it is. And he would
exactly.
just, and get it right and just hang up, and you would
Yes.
never make that mistake again. That was
No.
just done. But then it was making me think of the difference with Bruce's management style, because I was there in the early days with him, and I think more in the new place, he would often sort of stick his head in the door or look in the window and give you that sort of half smirk,
Yeah.
and either a shrug or some sort of gesture to say that wasn't right, do better. And the differences in the men's management styles, and they both had very high standards and pushed students to do as well as they could, but the styles were so different and yet both very effective. So
And to both of their credit, it was, that was clear evidence that they were listening and that they were always listening.
yeah.
They were the general managers. It was basically the buck stopped with them. But by the same token, they weren't control freaks either. They knew it was a
No.
campus radio station. They knew it was run by students, and they basically put their faith in the people around them to basically uphold the professional standards, that the radio at the radio station. But yes, it was clear, and it wasn't just when he was in the office. I have memories of even either at night or over the weekend, and we would be doing games, and I would get a note every once in a while from Jeff, mentioning something about how he listened to a portion of whatever game was being done, and he liked the broadcast and he liked the sound, and so it wasn't just when he was clocking in and clocking out. It would be when he was at home too that he would flip on the station and he would listen. So they were always tuned in, and
Hmm.
I think it was kind of a subtle reminder that, whenever I went on the air, at whatever time it was, it was always kind of in the back of my head. Say, you never know, Jeff might be listening out there. So, put in a good shift. Don't take a shift off, or, don't take a play off, or, always, do a good job, because you never know who's listening out there.
Yeah, yeah, amen to that. Well, this has been a great vantage point to seeing how you knew both these men and your experience. And I was remembering again some of our conversation from the last time we did one of these. But I was wondering, of all the stories, and you've got many stories, of all your stories about Hofstra Radio, is there one that you always tell? If Hofstra Radio comes up in some fashion, then you're like, this is my story. What is it?
Well, if I had to pick one, it would be, the fall of my sophomore year, so it'd be 1987,
Hmm.
and it was a football. It was a football playoff game, of course. Dating myself by talking about Hofstra football. That's it enough. That's it. That tells you right there about how old I am. And back when I was in school as an undergrad, Hofstra was Division III in football. And all 4 years that I was there, Hofstra made the playoffs each year. Unfortunately, all 4 years they lost in the first round. It wasn't until the year after I graduated when my dear friend Stephen Oling, who is a fabulous producer at ESPN, he took over for me as the sports director the year after I graduated. And he and my other dear friend, Marshall Hausfeld, a legendary editor and producer at NBC,
Mm-hmm.
they were basically the anchor the year after I graduated. And that year, Hofstra got all the way to the national semifinals um, um, in Division III. But anyway, so I digress. So anyway, so we go back to the late fall of 1987. Now, it's hard to kind of communicate this, but back then when we would do games, even at home, we would have to lug this gargantuan square steel box that we
Mm.
affectionately called the strong box. Basically, if you would imagine uh, like the black box that airplanes keep in their cockpits, and I can only imagine what that felt like. This had to be 100 times worse. It had to be at least 30 pounds, and we had to carry it everywhere. Granted, some of us had cars, so we could drive from point to point, but we basically had to go from the radio station to either the fabulous physical fitness center for basketball games or to the football stadium for football games. And those two places were clear across campus. So if you didn't have a car and you had to carry this box, I mean, it was in and of itself a feat of athletic ability just to carry that across.
Yeah, and I think
So
that the size and shape of it, in addition to the weight, because like you said, it was square, but I want to say it was like 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet by like
yes,
maybe it was not easy in any way for one person to carry it, even if
no,
you were strong enough. It was just so unwieldy.
it had a handle. It had a handle, but you're right. It definitely was not designed for one person to carry it. And I
Right.
think invariably it was a tag team effort. Whoever was doing the game, there would be two of us that would try to carry the strong box. Um, but yes, and we took it on the road. We put it on airplanes. I mean, this thing survived many road trips. But yes, it was. Um, Extremely bulky, extremely heavy, and extremely uncomfortable. So now we finally get the strong box to the football stadium, and now it's I don't I'll do the best I can to try to describe it. But the football stadium back then was basically, well, the press box anyway at the stadium was basically one floor, and the broadcasting facilities were up on the second floor. And the only way to get up on the second floor was to literally climb a ladder straight. It was a steel ladder, and you're basically going straight up and straight up.
Mm.
Like there wasn't even an angle to it. You just basically had to climb this ladder straight up. Now imagine trying to go up this ladder and having to carry this 30-pound strong box at the same time. There wasn't any sort of mechanism to get the strong box up there other than you had to carry it up the ladder. And invariably, somebody behind you would have to kind of be pushing the box as you were kind of carrying it up to the top. So, so now you get to the second floor, and it's nothing but a drafty old sort of covered. It's got a wooden floor. There's basically two positions, and what they built were these covered places where the broadcasters would. And strangely enough, the football coaches, the ones that would be elevated, the assistant coaches with the headsets to communicate, they would be up there too, and they would basically be in an open air space in between where the enclosed facilities were for the radio. Well, of course, they didn't like that too much, and soon they commandeered the booths, if you will, and now the radio guys had to be outside in open air and drafty facilities.
Mm.
So in this particular the particular game, it was the first round of the playoffs in 1987. We were hosting Fordham. And Stu Rushfield was supposed to do play-by-play, and I was color. Stu came down with a case of laryngitis. So Tony Sabilla, another legendary broadcaster, we're doing a lot of games in northern Pennsylvania these days. So Tony took over for Stu. The wind was blowing at a minimum of 40 miles, had to be at least 40 miles an hour. The wind chill factor that day had to be 30 below zero. And we are basically completely unprotected by whatever facility we were sitting in up on the second floor of the press box. We tried to keep the window open a little bit because we wanted to feed a microphone outside the window so we could get some ambient crowd noise. So at least it would sound like a football game. But of course, with the wind blowing, it sounded basically like there was a rotary fan basically right next to us while we were doing it. So it sounded terrible. And also back then, strange even to think about it. We didn't even have headset microphones, or at least I think Tony had a headset microphone. I had a handheld microphone. So I'm holding a handheld microphone, freezing, and to put an exclamation point on it, Fordham is beating the daylights out of us. They didn't throw the ball once the whole game. They ran a power eye the whole game and ran the ball down our throats and beat us. I think it was like 41-6. It was a completely non-competitive game. So throw that on top of the fact that we're both freezing. And I'm shivering. I can't even hold the microphone still because I'm shivering and shaking so much. And just the memory of being there and being so cold and being so devastated at the result of the game because, like I said, it was non-competitive from the beginning. So now the broadcast doesn't sound anything good, and we don't know what to do. So we're looking at each other. It's like the third quarter. We'll be like, well, screw it. Anybody who's lasted this long to listen to the game. So we tried our best to try to entertain people. We tried to joke around. I mean, we weren't goofing around. We were trying to be as professional as we could, but we were trying to interject at least some humor into the broadcast.
Right.
Trying our best to entertain the crowd that was listening to us. But it was miserable. So now on the way back to the station, we had to bring and this is like a Saturday afternoon. This wasn't even a night game. This was an afternoon game. So now we're miserable on the way home. Also to add to it, Stu Rushfield always had the motto "Dress to Impress." The first time I ever did a gig for the station when I was a freshman, he said, you need to wear something professional, and he always wore a suit to a game. And I always found that interesting. I said, look, we're doing a game on radio. Why are you wearing a suit? And Stu's motto was "Dress to Impress." So we kept that mantra during the whole time that we were there. And he was right. Even, especially when you went on the road, you made it look like that you belonged there and that you were one of them. Because there were these seasoned adult professionals, both on the air and both, being sports writers and stuff like that. So you're, a 19, 20-year-old college kid, you wanted to look like you fit in. So he was dead right. But to put a bow on this long-winded story, so now we're walking the strong box back to the radio station, and of course I'm in a full suit while we're doing this. So completely uncomfortable carrying it back. We get back to the radio station. We meet up with some of the guys in the radio station. We talk about the broadcast. They say about, they kind of offer their condolences about how difficult it was to be there, especially to survive the elements. And all I remember was my friend Jason Levy, who I think was, he was either station manager or program director at the time. I apologize if I'm getting the titles wrong. He's sitting next to me while we're talking about it, and he literally has to move about 5 feet away from him because just sitting next to me in the radio station, his body temperature dropped like 10 degrees. That's how cold we were. And he says, "I'm sorry, I have to move away from you because you're freezing, and I don't want to be freezing too." So that's the one. That's the one story that I always go to whenever I talk about my memories at Hofstra, because it kind of encompasses the where the university was, especially when it came to athletics back then, where the radio stations back then was about equipment, and you know, I think about it, and this is what 37. This will be 37 years later this fall. It's funny how that's kind of the one memory that always pops into my head whenever I talk about my experience at the radio station.
Yeah, that's an indelible memory. That's going to leave a mark
Oh yes.
beyond all other things. And I heard this a few years ago, and I tell this to my students that there are three kinds of fun. And there's the first kind of fun that is just instantly fun. It's great, and there's no question about it. The second kind of fun is, oh, maybe later on, you went through it and it was hard, and later on you can sort of joke about it. And then there's the third kind of fun, which is no fun at all. It's just suffering, and there's nothing redeeming about it. So I think that story is
Yes.
somewhere between the second and third kinds of fun, that you got through it, you survived it. It wasn't fun, it wasn't good, but you'll have the
Well,
story forever.
Well, because like I said, Tony and I looked at each other after the third quarter when the matter or I should say, the issue was never in doubt. That's when we looked at each other and be like, "Hey, let's just throw everything and see what sticks." Because you're right. At that point, the only thing you can do is laugh, because if I started crying, I think the tears would have frozen to my cheek. So
Right.
that definitely was not going to be an option.
Yeah, and even the highest paid broadcasters in a blowout, it's something everyone dreads because there's no drama to it. There's nothing, and you have to vamp and you have to come up with things. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys did your best to pull it off, and you survived that. And thankfully, no one lost any toes or fingers on that day in the
Yes,
extreme
that
elements.
is. You're right. That is true that we both came back intact. So that was definitely a victory. That was definitely a victory for us, if not for the football team.
So that's certainly a memorable story, and I'm sure you have more. Is there a game that you called other than that, or another event that in your mind sort of encapsulates or describes your time at Hofstra Radio?
It's hard to pick one, but one that often comes to my mind would be my senior year, and it was basketball, and the basketball team was playing Tulane, and the game was in New Orleans, so it was a big road trip for us. We didn't take a lot of road trips. Certainly with the football team, there weren't really that many big road trips. Going to Pennsylvania, or some people went to Washington D.C. and things like that. But basketball offered itself up some real road trips. And my senior year, Marshall and I went to New Orleans to call a game against Tulane. And back then was interesting because Hofstra basketball was not very competitive. It was the league they were in was called the East Coast Conference, which
Hmm.
definitely doesn't exist for many, many years. It basically morphed into what eventually became the America East Conference in the mid to late 90s, but it has no resemblance to what it is now. But certainly the league that Hofstra's in now, is infinitely more competitive than what it was back then. Um, so it was very difficult to try to schedule non-conference games, especially against anything competitive. Well, Tulane was just coming off of they got the death penalty for basketball because of recruiting violations and so
Hmm.
forth. So it was basically their first year back. So they basically were playing anybody. So Butch, and this was back when Butch Van Bredikoff was in his second tenure as the Hofstra basketball coach. So schedules this game against Tulane. So New Orleans in itself, very exciting trip to go down there. I'd never been to Louisiana before. And the first thing that struck me when we were setting up was how nice everybody was at the facility where we were broadcasting. Um, the representatives from Tulane, the sports information director, the maintenance people were all they were bending over backwards trying to help us make sure that we were set up properly, make sure that we had everything. Um, I think we ran into some technical issues trying to set things up, and a maintenance guy's like, "Wait a second, I've got a 50-foot extension cord. We could rig something up." Nothing but above and beyond nice people down there. The game itself started off terrible. And as a matter of fact, in the second half, we were down 18. I believe it. I still stand by it was 18 points. I'll get to that. I'll get to the punchline in a second if I didn't give it away already. So we're down 18 points in the second half, and we mount this unbelievable comeback. And the game actually goes into overtime, and Frank Walker, with like under a minute left to play, just dribbles across half court and just stops from the 3-point line and nails it. The call is I still kind of have some vague recollection of my call. It's terrible because, like I said, I'm almost stunned that he takes the shot. So there's basically like about 3 or 4 minutes of 3 or 4 seconds of radio silence. And then all of a sudden I just blurt out, be like, and Frank Walker makes a 3 to give Hofstra the lead. And just out of nowhere. And then Hofstra goes on to win the game. So it was a great finish. And of course, the whole team and the radio people were all staying in the same hotel afterwards. And we're at this sports bar. Obviously, we're not old enough to drink, but, we're sort of, staying away from the alcohol, but we're still sort of hanging around with some of the coaches. And I said to one of the coaches, his name was Joe Dunleavy. I said, I can't believe it. I said, we came back from 18 points down in the second half and won in overtime. And he looks me dead in the eye and he points his finger at me. He says, it was 20 points and don't you forget it. I said, okay, coach, I'm not going to argue with you if that, I said, fine. And it's an even better story. I said, okay, we came back down from 20 points to do that. And unfortunately that was my senior year. That also kind of led to sort of I would say probably my least favorite moment. And it had to do with the conference playoffs. Cause of course back then, just like it is now, even for a lowly conference like ours, if you won your conference tournament, you got an automatic bid to the NCAA. And my first 3 years, we basically had no chance. As a matter of fact, my sophomore year, the basketball team had one of the worst records in history. We were 6-22. I think we ended up being 6-21 because I think one of the losses to Lafayette, if I remember correctly, was vacated because Lafayette had some sort of violation or something going on. But whatever it was, one of the worst seasons in Hofstra basketball history was my sophomore year. So my first 3 years, we really didn't have much of a chance. My senior year, we're actually tied for the conference for first, and through a series of tiebreakers, we actually have the number 1 seed going into the conference tournament. And back then, there were only 8 teams in, so every team qualified for the tournament, and there's basically a quarterfinal, a semifinal, and a final. So for the playoffs and for the tournament, we always would bring 3 people down to do games because we kind of had the attitude, if you're going to do 3 games, you should kind of rotate it for, give everybody a chance to at least do a game. So, of course, we were confident going in that they were going to advance through at least the quarterfinals. So I said, okay, Stephen and Marshall, you guys do the quarterfinal game against Bucknell. I'll do stats and I'll just sort of, because we started getting the idea back my junior and senior year that when you did games, even though you were at home, because even though you're at home, things could go wrong all the time. I'll tell a story about that in a second. So we got the idea that we really should have a third person doing games. Even though they weren't on the air, they should at least be backup technical. So if there was something going wrong, at least there was someone off air that could either communicate back to the studio or at least troubleshoot at the site. So at least the broadcasters didn't have to worry about trying to solve any technical problems. So that was kind of our idea through the last couple of years when I was at the station, to have 3 people do games home or be at the games home and away. And Marshall especially, really, he was good at being on the air. He didn't really like it as much. He knew that wasn't really his kind of forte, but he was great at doing stats. He was great at coming up with nuggets off air. He was great at keeping track of things. And it was almost his preference to do that. Like, he was more than happy to have two people do a game, and he'd be the third guy keeping stats, and he would be feeding information, because he would come up with so many things while the game was happening to really kind of enhance the game. But, we're still at the station, said, okay, fine. Steve, Marshall, you guys do the first game. And of course, it became my greatest regret probably in my entire life, because Hofstra ends up losing the game to Bucknell, and then, of course, get eliminated. And then that's my lasting memory, my very last game as a quote-unquote broadcaster, and I'm not even on the air. And I always said to myself, I said, I should have been more assertive to say, I'm doing play-by-play. This is my last year. You guys are both juniors. I'm doing play-by-play all three games. You guys are going to alternate doing color. We called it color commentary, although it was kind of always an interesting term because it was radio to say color commentary, because no color. But we use color as more of an adjective that rather than a noun, to basically say that you're enhancing the broadcast and things like that. So that's always my sort of my least favorite memory was sort of getting on the bus ride home, realizing that my career is over, because back then for us it was basketball. I'm sorry, it was football and basketball.
Right.
In the spring, there weren't really facilities. We thought about doing baseball, but baseball was open air. The station itself wasn't really enamored by it. Basically their best offer was, you could do games if you want, but they're going to be on tape delay. And we thought, that's kind of silly. Yeah, it might be an interesting experience. Because it was funny, because for those people who are interested or follow college lacrosse will know the name John Danowski, who is one of the most successful lacrosse head coaches in history. And he's been at Duke now. I think this is almost 20 years for him that he's been
at least
the head coach at Duke, but he was the head coach at Hofstra, and he was kind of starting out around the same time that I was there. And John, we would cross paths every so often. And John almost was practically begging me to put his games on the air. And another one of my regrets, but I don't really call it a regret, because it was my experience back then. I didn't really know the game that well at all. I know it a lot more now if we want to talk about my, what I'm doing now, 30 years later or 35 years later. But I know a lot more about the game now than I did back then. So I never really felt comfortable enough. Like I said, plus the fact that the radio station was only going to put the games on tape delay, I didn't really see much value in that. Plus it was exhausting, basically being in charge, basically from September until March, just going nonstop radio station, especially basketball. We're basically doing 2 games a week and sometimes on the road. So I felt almost exhausted and relieved that we weren't really doing anything in the spring. Obviously now, with the facilities where they are, the facilities both at Hofstra and at the radio station obviously lend itself more to more avenues to be able to do games, so they can do baseball games and they can do softball games and lacrosse and things like that. But I did feel bad that we never really did anything in the spring, even though it would have been a challenge for us to do that.
Yeah, I think the facilities, like you said, just weren't there. There was, in order to where the baseball fields were, in order to have broadcast facilities, it would have been, like you said, miles of extension cords, and it would have been unprotected, and the sound probably wouldn't have been too terribly great. But
right. We had a remote antenna called a Marty. It's an
Yeah.
acronym. I don't remember what it stands for. Sorry, I'm looking up in the heavens. Sorry, Jeff. So we did have the ability, because we did some remotes at the radio station when there was that big Hands Across America. We did Hands Across Hofstra, and we used the remote antenna in the student center to be able to have people on site to broadcast from the student center while I was the producer back at the home office in Memorial Hall. So we did have some capabilities, but like you said, if there was no press box at the baseball field, if we were just going to be sitting on a mound, exposing ourselves to whatever the elements are, plus with baseball, you never, especially college baseball, you never know how long these games are going to go. I mean, it could be a
Mm-hmm.
13 to 12 4 hour marathon, and we're sitting outside, in the elements trying to call a game. It just didn't, I don't, like I said, I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad that we never did it because I knew it wasn't practical. I just feel bad that it wasn't something that we could pull off given the circumstances that we were in. Because, like I said, now that I know more about the sports themselves,
Mm.
um, it's possible we could have done something. But like I said, I don't want to say that that's a regret because, like I said, if I had to make those decisions back then, given the circumstances, I would have made the same. I would have made the same decisions that I did then. So I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to ask. I mean, it's an amazing thing, but it's a hard thing to ask someone who's an undergraduate, like you said, 20, 21 years old, to make these decisions and to manage a staff and to, do the budgeting. It's a lot to ask, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
responsibility in making those decisions. And as you were telling the story about the last basketball game and missing out on the opportunity to call another one. I wonder if you can separate your feelings as an individual who wanted to call that last game versus your feelings as sports director and saying, did I make the right decision? Was it good for the department to have them do it? Is there a difference or is it all tied up together?
Like I said, it's both because as sports director, I could have, and like I said, should have essentially put my foot down and said to the guy, like I said, if we were all graduating seniors, I probably would have made the same decision that I did back then.
Hmm.
But the fact that Stephen and Marshall were both juniors and both fantastic broadcasters and great friends too, and great friends to this day, um, I think they would have. I think they would have understood if I had said to them, "I'm doing play by play all three games. You guys can alternate doing color commentary." But I need to set I said I should have said to them, I said, I'm never doing this again. You guys are going to have another year. um, so um, I can't be democratic. I have to be selfish about this
Hmm.
because I'm never going to have this opportunity again. Now, granted, we had the pie in the sky feeling, okay, it's the number one seed, the basketball team is good, you know, dreams of winning the conference tournament and actually going to the NCAA tournament. Um, um, Obviously, a tremendous pipe dream, but um, I definitely should have been a little bit more selfish just from a management standpoint to kind of just think back and say, like I said, this is my last go around. You
Yeah.
guys still have another year. So I understand you guys want to do these games, but for my own sake, I have to do this because I'm never going to have this chance again.
Hmm. Oh, it's a tough call.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, and like I said, these guys were my friends. They were close friends. So I and look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. My management skills as the sports director definitely left a lot to be desired because it was hard for me to separate the friendship from the position. It was hard for me to look somebody in the eye and say, you guys royally screwed up and I'm going to suspend you, which I actually had to do um, with, without something that I don't want to get into. But it was definitely something that made me upset. And it not only made me upset, it made the radio station um, it compromised the radio station, which is the reason why I had to do it. Um, but um, but still, even though it was the right decision to make, looking these people in the eye, knowing that these guys are friends and we joke around and we have fun, but also trying to be, someone in charge who gets to make these decisions. it was hard. It was kind of the same thing with creating schedules, because
Hmm.
back when we created the schedules, we would basically have a meeting before the season starts. We would all get together around my desk, and I would basically put the schedule up, and I would kind of pick out a few dates of games that I would do, or me and whoever the lead analyst was, and say, okay, we're doing these games. Now you guys divvy up the rest, which, like I said, looking back on that, kind of like, well, it's kind of an interesting way to do it, but not really what a sports director really should be doing. Like, the sports director really should be kind of soliciting, because I see this in my own job now with my own director above me, having similar ideas, and I keep thinking to myself, looking at the director, and be like, well, this is your job, you're supposed to figure this out.
Right.
Don't put this on me about what I should be doing. And I think back, it's funny, I haven't really thought about that until now, about how that's the way I was when I was the sports director back then. Like, some of the decisions that I should have been making as the sports director, I kind of left it up to the staff to let them try to figure it out. And, thinking back on that now, it's like, okay, that was kind of silly to do that.
But I maintain through a lot of these interviews is that it's a really hard place to be because they are your friends and they are your peers, and it's tough to tell someone, no, you're not going to do this, or I'm going to make this decision, because you don't want to hurt people's feelings. But
Right.
it's good experience, and it may not pay off in the moment, but eventually, hopefully that experience
And it,
leads to something better.
bringing this back full circle, some people call this a callback. This was exactly what Jeff was trying to get me to think about when I interviewed for the sports director position as a
Mm.
freshman. These were the scenarios that Jeff was trying to get something out of me, saying, well, what if you tell somebody they should be doing this and they don't do it? What are you going to do about it? And my answer was, well, I'm never going to tell somebody to do that, so it's silly to do that. And
Oh,
I keep thinking about this to this day. I'm like he's doing everything he possibly can to try to tell you this is what the position is about. These are the things you're going to have to think about, and you're totally screwing it up. So I'll go back to that. That is going to be my greatest regret at the radio station, was not reading the signals that Jeff was clearly trying to show me as a freshman, to say, you're going to be sports director one day and you're going to have to make these decisions.
yeah, and I think with a lot of things with young people, you can give as much advice and as much guidelines, or however you want to put it. They still have to make the decisions, and they're still going to screw up, and they have to learn from it. And I think that's
Yeah.
that's part of it. You can have the best of intentions, but they have to go through those things themselves and learn. You can't, whether it's students or your own kids, or younger colleagues, they have to go through the process.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So you threw out a word there for a second. It reminded me. I think you said something about screw ups. Are there any funny stories that you feel like you're legally protected to share, or screw ups, or road trips? The sports department road trips are allegedly legendary. I've never heard much in the way of details, but is there something you wouldn't mind sharing, that always makes you laugh to this day?
Well, I have two. One with regarding the sports department, and one just regarding the radio station and it's up in and of itself. So the sports department. So the two big trips, when I was an upperclassman, Stephen Oling and I went to Florida, for a basketball tournament, that was outside of Orlando. And coming before me, when I would go on the road trips with the people, with my senior, staff, with the senior staff people, Stu Rushfield always had a tape recorder in his hand, and he was always interviewing people. He was always, in any sort of funny situation. And when the road trip was over, they would go back in the studio and they would actually come up with editing, and they would actually put together like a reminiscent, souvenir tape, if you will, of whatever their experience was. So I took the same, play out of Stu's playbook. So Steven and I are flying down to Florida. Now, didn't realize this. I don't think I realized this until we were in the airport, but this is Steven's first time being on an airplane, and he's terrified. And I don't even think I realized it while we were setting all this stuff up if this was going to happen. So I'm trying to interview Steve on the plane, and Steve's not having any of it. He's trying his best to try to keep it together, but he wants no part of this. I'm interviewing the flight attendants. I'm telling the flight attendant it's his first flight and everything, and he's miserable. So that's just the opening of the trip. We actually spend a trip to Orlando. We go to Disney. I bring the tape recorder. We're riding roller coasters. We're listening to ourselves riding the roller coasters. It's all fun and great. We've got great audio, great tape, and everything. We go back to the studio. We make this tape. It's called the Florida tape. We send a copy of it. One of the senior executives at Hofstra, his name is Mike DeLuise. He's on the trip with us. We make him a copy of it because he's there with us the whole time. He sees me recording. He says, whenever you guys make this tape, send me a copy. We send him a copy of the tape, and it's magic. It's just absolute gold what we put together. It could be the greatest thing that certainly the thing I'm most proud of at the station was putting together this tape. It never went to air because it was only for us. We played it a few times for some of our friends. Well, unfortunately, the Florida tape doesn't exist anymore. We can't find a copy of it. I couldn't find the master of it. It disappears. Oh. So unfortunately, the Florida tape is now the stuff of legend because we can't do it. The next year, we go to California to do a road trip. We do a game in Long Beach and a game in Fresno. We take a trip to Disneyland. We do the same thing. We bring the tape recorder on. We're on Space Mountain, and we're doing all this other stuff. We put together the tape. The California tape is the one I still have. It's not as good. We listen to it. It's like, it's good. It's not as good as the Florida tape. But we can't find the Florida tape. So the Florida tape, if anybody who's out there listening has a copy of me and Steven doing the Florida tape, hold on to it with both hands because I can't find it. I can't find a master. I can't find a copy. I could have sworn we made a couple of copies of it. I can't find it anywhere.
We'll have to reach out to Mike DeLuise and see if
maybe Mike DeLuise does it. Maybe Mike DeLuise does have it. I don't know. Actually, we're Facebook friends. I could ask Mike if he has a copy of it. So those are the great stories when we have, like I said, when we had the ability to be able to kind of put together a retrospective. But anyway, so the other story the goof story, it's not really my goof as much because I'm trying to remember if there's any. I mean, obviously people who listen to me. Well, I could tell the one story of the very first game that I did on air as a freshman. I'm doing color commentary. Stu's doing play-by-play. This is at the Physical Fitness Center, which basically is a step down from a high school gym, if you can believe it. The facilities back then, there was no press row for basketball. The table was basically put in like the third row of the bleachers. When we broadcasted games at our own facility, we're sitting in the third row of the bleachers surrounded by fans. And we basically had to plug in to the wall a line dedicated that was connected to the Hofstra to Memorial Hall. So we basically needed like a 50-foot extension cord to plug into the wall because we were sitting in the bleachers doing basketball games. And the very first game that I ever did on air was the championship game of the inaugural basketball tournament called the Hofstra Classic. And I said on the air, I said, how can you call something a Hofstra Classic when it's the first time that we're doing this? But in any case, so we're playing Manhattan College. It's not a very well-played game, but the game is tied. And at the end, at the buzzer, a guy named John Yarger puts a tip in or a putback at the buzzer to win the game, and Hofstra wins the inaugural Hofstra Classic. Now I know Stu still has the tape, so if you want to get the tape from Stu and you want to incorporate this into your little production, go right ahead. because I remember some of what I said, but I don't remember all. I said something like all kinds of bodies flying all over the place, and John Yarger grabs the ball, puts it in, and Hofstra wins the basketball game. And I'm kind of still on this emotional high because it's a buzzer beater, and I'm excited. It's my first game, and I look Stu dead in the eye, and I say, incredible, Stu. I don't know how to describe it. And what I meant to say, of course, is I don't know how to describe the feeling that I'm doing, but like I said, it came out, it said, incredible. I don't know how to describe it. After I did this 45-second description of what just happened. And then I said, I just said, I don't describe it. Of course, Stu was best man at my first wedding. And of course he gave the toast and he recited word for word that exact broadcast for all
That's a true friend.
For all people to attend to hear that. So,
oh, that's great.
That'll be my embarrassing sports moment. Was my first game ever on the air. The other goof that I always think about, and like I said, it wasn't really mine, but of course back then you weren't just a sports person because there wasn't enough time to fill in sports. You know, we don't have what we do today where you have the alternative web channel and you've got streaming and you've got all these different outlets. And, you know, we didn't even have like a talk show, like there's no locker room and there's no like Inside the Huddle or whatever, all the other wonderful programs that they do now. It was basically just, you know, do games and then the sports, somebody would do a sport, like a 2-minute sports report on the nightly news report. So we had to fill up time with doing other shifts. So one of the shifts that I did was for this country music show. But it was basically most of the time it was just on tape. So all I had to do was sit in master control and run a tape and listen to it. And I can't remember what the name of the show was. Maybe it'll come to me. But it was not just, hey, we're playing country music. It was country music where the host would focus on a particular theme, whether it was some artist or some style of music, or maybe it was some momentous date in country music history. But it was always something that was theme based. So I'm playing this tape, and I could clearly hear that on the tape, you could hear faintly in the background, it's also the tape of another show that she basically did not, without getting too technical to our radio audience out there, she did not degauss her tape all the way. That she did not fully erase what was on the original tape before she recorded this one. And you could clearly hear another of the same show in the background of the show that she's broadcasting. So I could hear it. Now, I don't know if anybody else who was listening out there, gave a darn about whether or not, but to me, it sounded terrible. And I think I let it go for like 5 minutes. And I said, I can't listen to this anymore. And I said, I can't in good conscience put this on the air anymore. I said, I'm shutting it down. So I played like a couple of PSAs while I came up. Well, I was also coming up with an idea before I said I was going to shut this down. I said, well, you better think this through, because if you're shutting this down, you're the one who's going to be on the air. So you better have to come up with an idea. So I said, well, and it had to be something within the theme. So I'm thinking to myself, if I shut this down, what do? I know nothing about country music, except for the fact that I don't really like the genre. So I'm thinking to myself, what could I possibly do on the air so that I don't sound like a total jackass, but at the same time, maintain the show's integrity, maintain the quality. So I'm looking around the room at our albums and I said, wait, there's this guy, Willie Nelson. I've heard of him. What if I just start playing Willie Nelson songs for the rest of the hour and just say, hey, the theme this week is we're honoring Willie Nelson, whatever it is. So I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. So I go to the wall where Willie Nelson is. Fortunately, the records are alphabetized, so it was easy to find. And I find a whole bunch of record albums with Willie Nelson. So I said, okay, fine. I'm gonna bite the bullet. I'm gonna make this decision. So like I said before, I stopped the show. I played a couple of PSAs. I come back on the air and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but we're having technical difficulties with the show. So we're going to do this live. And now the theme this week is going to be Willie Nelson. So give me a call and give me your favorite Willie Nelson songs, and we'll play them on the air, and we'll put some songs. So I'm playing a few Willie Nelson songs because I think what came to my mind about Willie Nelson, the British alternative band Pet Shop Boys, did a cover of Always on My Mind that year. And I think that always stuck with me because I was like, oh, it's a really good rendition. It's kind of like a little alternative, like British poppy version of the song. They did a really nice job. So I think that's probably why I had Willie Nelson stuck in my head. So I played, as part of the songs that I was playing, I played the original Always on My Mind. And then I got on the air and talked about how, the Pet Shop Boys, did a cover song of it, and it's really good. You should check it out. So I was almost kind of sounding like a real DJ hopefully doing justice to this show. So I'm playing Willie Nelson songs. People are calling in with requests. Somebody calls up and requests On the Road Again.
Great.
And it didn't occur to me until he said it. It's like, oh yeah, he did On the Road Again, didn't he? Well, I could not for the life of me find an album that had the song On the Road Again on it. I looked twice. I looked 3 times. I could not find a single album that had On the Road Again. And I had to get on the air and I had to apologize. And I said, a listener called in and said he wanted to play On the Road Again. And obviously that's probably Willie Nelson's most favorite song. And I said, I apologize to the listeners. I said, I can't find the song. And that's kind of how the hour ended. And I said, I appreciate you indulging me and putting up with me. And we'll be back next week with another edition of whatever the name of the show was.
Would it have been Western Star and Alice Leroy?
It might have been. That does sound familiar because I remember it was a woman who was the host.
Yeah.
Alice Leroy. I think that does sound familiar. So we'll go with that. It was Western Star with Alice Leroy. So yeah. So unfortunately, that was my low moment. That was my low moment of non-sports on the air work.
Oh my goodness. That again, that's another story that will leave a mark and will stick with you for a long time. I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you miss most about your time at Hofstra Radio?
Well, first and foremost, it's the people.
Yeah.
It's the people. It's people that I haven't mentioned yet, like Jason Levy, Rich Radabali, Andrew Schmertz, Doug Oken. Those people were like the backbone of the station. The station manager, the program director, Ryan Williams, who was one of our chief announcers. I said Michelle Alisi, of course. So many people. I hate to keep mentioning names because I know I'm going to leave people out and I don't want to offend people because I'm still friends to this day, especially given with social media, it's easy to be friends with these people. Eliana Baslaw, coming to mind. But it was really the people, because back then, we were really sort of a fringe club. It was really hard to get people to join the radio station. That's one of the things that I think back on about where the radio station was and what it's become. The fact that the radio station has become what it is, the fact that they're basically training, 40 or 50 people every semester before they even get on the air about what it is to work at the station. The fact that people have to audition before they even get trained. The fact that they're turning people away at the radio station is mind-boggling to kind of wrap my head around, because in my time at the radio station, you couldn't get enough people to work at the radio station. That when you finally got cleared, when you finally got combo cleared, you had to get a shift, and it wasn't necessarily something that it was up your alley. It had to be classical music or jazz music or maybe you did like the alternative music with Tim McDonald doing Airwave overnights, or Darren Smith trying to drop names to as many
Mm,
people, because eventually somebody's going to listen and say, "Hey, you left me out. How come you didn't mention my name?" Um, so back then, we had to do something, or on the weekends, because sports was basically every Saturday afternoon. So if there wasn't a game, most of the time it was Irish music. It was Pat Thompson's Irish show or Tony Jackson's Irish country. So we had to engineer, of course, my dear friend Eileen DeCalis,
hmm
um, instrumental in also doing that. But fond memories of the on-air talent like Tony Jackson and Maureen. Tony and Maureen were some of the best people that I knew at the
Amen.
station. They were so nice to me, even though I even firmly admit it. It's like, I don't know anything about this music, but they're such great people, and I would just follow their lead, and I would just play the songs. And Tony would tell me, okay, I'm going to come on the air after this, or after this song, segue into the next song, whatever it was. They were such nice people. Or Basha doing polka music.
hmm
Um, you know, didn't know anything about that. But everybody they were just such nice people, because, they were so appreciative of having some sort of avenue where they could be on the air and they could do stuff that they loved. Um, so that's what I miss most about the intimacy and the camaraderie, about all of us just trying to figure stuff out and just trying to, get the station on the air. And, sometimes I often just shake my head, marveling how we managed to get the station on the air at whatever time it was, 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and then we go
hmm
off the air at 2 a.m. And how we managed to pull that off every day, 365 days a year. And even when we weren't going to school in January during the intersession, or in the summertime when we were off, um, just trying to um, just trying to keep things going. But I started getting a little bit of an affinity for jazz music, because um, when I would be at the radio station over the summer, um, Tony Sabilla and I used to dovetail jazz shows together, um, one day a week, and we would always have a little overlap time.
Mm.
So Tony and I would always talk about sports for a little bit in between. We sort of apologized and said two sports guys playing jazz music, but we would kind of talk about whatever the sports events of the week were, or things that were happening, kind of to segue between our two shifts, about playing jazz music. So
But I think that's a lot of fun, and that speaks to to the community, that these are people, they're human beings, and no one's interested in just one thing, and to make that your personal thing. That's neat. Thank you for sharing that. I like
yeah.
that a lot.
Well, like I said, it's places like that. It's about the people first. I mean,
Yeah.
you could be proud of the work you did or not proud of the work you did. I mean, that's kind of secondary. The fact that I was able to be on the air for 4 years, as a student, do something that I love, do something that I hope to be a career for me, but just to be able, um, to do those games, not even worrying about whether or not people were listening or how many people were listening. Um, but that was kind of secondary. The building the relationships with the people that work there, and the friendships with the people that work there. um, you know that's what I take away, because I never listen to myself anymore. I might have some tapes of me doing games
Hmm.
back then, but I never think about those times that much when it comes to the radio station. I always think back to the people and the friendships that I have to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, hypothetically speaking, you get a call from John Mullen or someone at the radio station said, "We need someone to fill in." Do you say yes?
I mean, people who know me, certainly people who are listening to this, know that I don't shy away from talking.
Mm.
I certainly don't shy away from being on a microphone. Um, so certainly, if people would reach out to me and say, you want to be a guest, as a matter of fact, moving forward to my current day, a colleague of mine that I work with, used to do a Saturday morning talk show about golf.
Hmm.
And we became when we started kind of working a couple of things close together. He would mention it to me, and we would talk about it. He knows that we're both well. He's a phenomenal golfer, a huge golfer, and I like to play, and we're both fans of the game. So he would ask me occasionally, you want to co-host, and he would get a guest. He would get a local guest because we live on Long Island, so he would get a local guest from Long Island. So I would do some prep work the night before about the guest and try to think about things to ask. Um, but he would ask me occasionally to do the show with him, and I was more than happy to do it. And I tell him anytime you want me on, I said I'm never going to say no. Obviously, unless if I have some sort of conflict or previous commitment. So from that standpoint, yes, if John Mullen picked up the phone, called me, and say, "Are you interested in doing something?" I, of course, would be tremendously interested in doing something because, like I said, I never shy away from an opportunity to be on the microphone. But
Hmm.
having said that, um, I don't want to do it at the expense of someone else, especially if it's a student
No,
who's
no, of course
there
not.
and things like that. Because that's something I never wanted to do. Once I left the radio station, as I said in an earlier part of our interview, I said it was never about me coming back and saying, "Okay, I'm going to resurrect my radio career. Put me on the air, and I'll show you what it's supposed to sound like." That was never my intention. And I know Michelle reached out to me every so often. Bruce did the same thing and kind of said something to that effect. Hey, come back. We'll find something for you to do and things like that. And a lot of times I kind of took well, first of all, I said I'm too busy with work to even think about doing something like that. But by the same token, I kind of said, that part of my life, I have very fond memories about it, but sometimes just leave it there. But as the long-winded answer to your question is, I would certainly listen to anyone who would call me and offer me an opportunity to get on the air. I would certainly listen to that person very
Okay.
carefully.
Okay, very good. You've mentioned so many things that you learned from Jeff and from Stu and from Tony and all these wonderful people that you worked with. Is there one thing or one lesson or idea that you took from Hofstra Radio into your professional and adult life?
Yes, and I think it's probably more than just one thing. Certainly about dealing with people and colleagues, especially when you become a more senior member, as I have in my current profession. Um, um, to be able to interact with people, to be able to work with people, you know, to be able to say difficult things only because you don't want to be, you're not trying to be mean or critical, but you realize that there's a greater good involved, that you're thinking about your overall product. Like when I was the sports director at the station, I not only had to think about my friends and about making sure that they got on air and that they sounded good and everything, but I was thinking about the radio station itself, that, my name's on the desk, and I'm the ultimate one responsible. So if the sports department screws up, or if something goes wrong, or if it doesn't sound good on the air, or if somebody says something inappropriate, I'm the one who gets the phone call, and I'm the one who has to answer for that. So to be kind of proactive in that sense, and to be able to work with people and to kind of come up with a gentle way of saying, we love what you're doing, but you can do better. Um, and here's a suggestion, kind of thing. That always sticks with me. Fortunately, in my profession now, that I guess we've teased it enough. I am actually going into my 30th year of being a high school math teacher.
Wow.
So certainly my communication skills come in handy. And I'm also fortunate enough to be involved with our athletic programs, where I do public address announcing, and I do scoreboard work, and I host our pep rally in the fall sports pep rally. The student government has repeatedly asked me to be the MC. So I've never really lost the announcing bug. I look at my life in the last, the last almost 30 years, and I look at it as kind of the best of both worlds, that I got to be a high school math teacher, which is something that I never realized I wanted to do until I started doing it. But also to throw in the involvement with sports and broadcasting, and communications and things like that, and to be able to help other students kind of cultivate that love, and also to entertain them too, because especially being in high school and being a PA announcer, you want to be entertaining. You want to be entertaining as much as you want to be informative. So to have the kids say to me about how much they enjoy listening, and you're so funny and we really love it, and how the coaches come up to me and tell me how much they appreciate it, the parents come up to me and tell me how much they appreciate the work that I do. So it's very, very rewarding in that standpoint.
Wow, that is fantastic, Steve. This has been such a blast. I've been grinning and nodding my head the entire time. I thank you so much for your stories and for your time. This has been, yeah. I'm blown away. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm sorry for the long-windedness. Long-windedness. I guess it comes with the territory.
No, I
So
love it.
I'm sure your editing, it'll test your editing skills to try to make something out of this. But any chance, Brian, the work that you're doing is just so fantastic. Anytime anyone asks me, do you want to talk about your experience about WRHU? I absolutely jump at the chance, because the 4 years that I spent there, basically virtually from day one until graduation day, and like I said, even beyond, um, being involved with that radio station, meeting the people that I met, still maintaining the friendships that I've met, um, brings nothing but phenomenal memories, um, both of people that are still with us, and unfortunately people that have passed away, but still have wonderful memories of those people. But Brian, the work you're doing is fantastic. Keep up the good work. Thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to hearing more interviews from some more people.